afternoon. This is 2-on-1, a weekly talk show where we see the intersections of theology and pop culture. I'm the Reverend Arthur Stewart, joined by the co-host of this wonderful project, the Reverend Stephanie Kendall. Hello, Stephanie. Good to see you again.
Hi, Arthur. It's good to see you as well.
So, Stephanie, you know what's next week?
Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving. So what are you thankful for?
I'm really thankful for 2-on-1 and those that watch with us, that this community has grown and helped form my own theology and my networking of people, and that people are tuning in. I'm also grateful for our frontline workers during this time who are giving up so much to serve others. And so I don't know, I have a lot to be thankful for. What about you?
I'm gonna give a big old ditto to everything you just said. I'm also thankful for Schitt's Creek. I'm thankful for libraries. And I am thankful that my coffee makers, my coffee grinders here in Wichita will mail me my coffee because I'm both lazy and scared to death of getting COVID. Most importantly, though, I'm very thankful for our lead sponsor, Jeff One-Row Designs.
Ooh, that's a good one. I too am thankful for Jeff One-Row Designs, celebrating 15 years of making ordinary time extraordinary.
So, Spiff, I'm just going to be frank with you. If you want a stole, you should get one from Jeff One-Row Designs.
What about professional banners or seasonal banners or things like that?
Yes, you could get frontals, paraments, chasubles, copes, other vestments. If it's a liturgical textile, you should get it from Jeff One-Row Designs.
And Arthur, why is that?
Because they know what they're doing. They've been doing this for 15 years, and they have a diverse clientele from a variety of traditions, all of whom love their work.
So whether you are shopping for the smallest altar accessory or reevaluating your entire collection of vestments and paraments, Jeff One-Row Designs would be honored to work with you to create something perfect for you and your community.
Absolutely. Visit jeffone-row.com for a catalog of stoles, vestments, paraments, banners, along with ordering information and customization possibilities.
And for our listeners only, if you enter the code 2-on-1, all one word, you'll get 15% off every stole you buy.
Wow, that's fantastic. We want to thank Jeff One-Row Designs for being our lead sponsor and our favorite sponsor so far. These stoles still steal the show. Check them out at Jeff One-Row, JEFFWUNROW.com.
Jeff is so great. So I can't wait, with Thanksgiving and Christmas and Hanukkah and everything coming up. I'm sure, new uprisings and protests and things like that. Jeff has so many different stoles to help you. I'm grateful.
Me too. Okay, so let's talk about the devil.
Yes, can we? Can we please talk? I have been begging for this show, Arthur.
I know you. So for those of you that don't know, we do a pre-production meeting every week, and we'll talk about guests coming up. The second we booked our guest for today, Spiff has talked about Lucifer each and every week, hoping that I would watch it in advance, I bet, so we could talk about it, but we'll get there. Okay, so joining us today is Kelsey Creech. There she is, the Provost Supreme of the Yale Disciples Club. I just made that up. So, I mean, you do stuff with our wonderful disciples at Yale Divinity School, but I just made a title for you. Hello.
Hi. Hello.
So we are just, you know me, I'm very excited to talk Lucifer, and I'm always excited to talk to you, and I'm very excited to bring this conversation to 2-on-1 to all that are watching, and for all of us to engage this. But first, Kelsey, I know you really well, or I'm getting to know you really well. Would you introduce yourself a little bit more fully for those that don't get to spend their days with you?
Sure. I do feel like I spend pretty much every day with you now, Stephanie.
I do.
Yeah. But so my name's Kelsey. I am in my second year at Yale Divinity School, pursuing an MDiv and then hoping to be ordained in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. I grew up in Virginia and then made the move to Connecticut right when I started divinity school. In a past life, I studied accounting at the College of William and Mary. So, diverse interest. At Yale, I am president, or Provost Supreme works, of
Provost Supreme.
of the Disciples student group. And then I'm also a co-founder of a group called Movements that's devoted to bringing kind of embodied spirituality to like the heady academic space and sort of reclaiming the body within the Christian tradition. So
I love that.
Wait, like as if the physical body matters and we're not just spirits riding around in meat bags?
Yeah, almost as if like Jesus was actually in the body at some point and we need to talk about it.
What? That actually sounds a little incarnational, which kind of brings us to what we're discussing today. So, Lucifer.
So, Kelsey, tell us a little bit about your relationship to Lucifer before I just vom all my love for Tom Ellis and the show.
Yeah, I found Lucifer like right when I started divinity school is when I started watching it. And so I was in my first real theology class, because shockingly, you don't get a lot of that in accounting degrees. And as I was learning things, theology felt to me a lot like fan fiction that we had written and then sort of decided we were going to count as real, and it became canon. And then watching Lucifer was really helpful for me to put those things in conversation with each other, because it ruffled the theological waters I found myself treading in divinity school in a really helpful way. I found that the theologies we have and the theologies expressed in Lucifer, while often very different, are rooted in the Bible in really nice and concrete ways. And so I really enjoyed it for that reason. And then, of course, Tom Ellis.
And I don't know how you feel about this, but like Lucifer writes really, the writers write women really well. This is a show that obviously centers on Lucifer, who is presented as male in this space, but like the female characters that accompany him or accompany this entire journey are so strong, and so they make this world like it is not just our world with Lucifer in it, but it is a complex network of both human and divine people kind of living together and exploring what that actually means, which I think is really, for me, is something that really drew me in. Because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, aren't you one of the people that told me to watch Lucifer?
I believe I am. Yeah. And then you watched it, and then you were like, we need to talk about it.
Yeah. And then I was like, everyone needs to watch this, and Kelsey's got to come on 2-on-1.
And here
Arthur, and here we are. Arthur, what's your relationship to Lucifer?
This is one of those that I've heard great things about, but I will admit it, I started watching it this week in preparation for this interview. I like it. I like it a lot, because oftentimes I didn't realize when I watched CSI, what I really was missing was like big theological arguments being presented in some sort of like eschatological worldview. And you think I'm being sarcastic, but I'm not. This is kind of CSI, the Seven Circles of Hell. So.
And who's your favorite character, Arthur, now that you've dipped your toes in the Lucifer waters?
I'm gonna have to go for Lucifer. Like I like the way it's how I like to imagine the devil. Like just kind of, it's okay. So this can lead into my first question, if I may, and if you'll tell me your favorite characters too, but I want to throw this out there. Desire and passion are the two big things with Lucifer. It's not good or evil. It's not tell me the most wicked thing about you. It's his little like mind trick is, what do you deeply desire? What does that say about, I don't want to say Protestantism, but I do want to say like the kind of sterile stoicism that's seeped into our faith. Like why is passion or desire considered on the less savory side of the theological spectrum? Or why do you no, not a great question. No,
it's fine. I think that Kelsey, you want to answer? Do you have
it's not where I expected the question to go, so I'm trying to process it.
So
where you have an answer?
Question to have gone?
So for me, I think I'll answer your question, Arthur. I think so. For me, I think it's because it roots. It's rooted in the self and in the personal experience and identity rather than the communal one. And so desire, what do you desire? What he's doing is tapping into a very specific thing for a specific person in a specific time, rather than what we are taught in the church writ large, which is, to build and be community. And so maybe another way to ask this is, well, and one of my questions, so I'm going to piggyback onto Arthur, is what does the church desire?
Kelsey, you are our guest.
Yeah.
I defer to you, of course, please.
Oh, of course. I don't know how to answer that question, Stephanie, but I think I think the power of Lucifer being focused on desire is what it says about sin as a thing. I have found that, like, my own definition of sin is when we act selfishly, and so when we act focused exclusively on what we desire, we're inherently acting out of like selfish desire. And so that for me is why it makes sense for that to be Lucifer's superpower, if you will, as Chloe calls it.
His mojo.
Yeah.
So,
but it's interesting to think, sorry, I don't want to cut you off, Arthur, but it's interesting to think of that in terms of a community and what a community desires. Because I don't think that that's something Lucifer could pull out of a community. So that inherently involves discussion in a communal space.
Yeah. And I was, for me, where this was coming from and why I thought that this was an interesting question is because I think the church's deepest desire is to actually function as one, like to be the body of Christ, to kind of unity and uniformity in its best practice spaces, which means to lift up and value the individual, but as a collective whole, that collective whole's desire is truth. I think. What do you really desire? I think the church desires truthful and intentional and explicit relationship to God. Maybe.
Well, so I like that. I want to throw something out there too. So I watched the playlist that was suggested, and thank you for doing that.
Yeah, thanks, Kelsey.
Yeah.
So season 3, episode 1, spoilers, I guess. Spoilers.
Wait, this is a show about spoilers. It shouldn't be called 2-on-1 anymore. We should just call it spoilers. Like,
we will ruin everything you love. At the end of season 2, Chloe's poisoned. They're trying to figure out how to unpoison her, right? Mm-hmm. And they go to the money launderer, who is an art dealer, but it's just buy his horrible paintings, and he'll, you can charge whatever you want for art, which is a really good thing. And his deepest desire, when they try to figure out how to make him help, is he's like, I just want people to buy my art for like it being what it is. And do note, if you haven't seen the show, it's mermaids with clown faces, which also probably means there was a production assistant somewhere who like had 3 hours and like Crayola paints and just did it. I want to meet that person and kiss him on the mouth when COVID is over. Anyhow, so that deep desire, one, it wasn't art for the sake of art. It was art for the sake of information. So what he did was not actually meet that man's desire. But 2, is the church meant to be a place where desires and needs of the individual are met? I mean, I know that acting from self-interest, acting selfishly isn't, we've tied that to desire and tied desire to sin. But can the church be a place where individuals' desires are met, so long as they're not inherently harmful? Or should it be a place where they're not?
I think that's a really interesting question. And I'm inclined to say yes, especially because throughout the show, when Lucifer asks people what their desires are, they're very rarely inherently bad or like evil. It's just when they start acting to get those things themselves all on their own, they start making mistakes and then doing things that harm other people. And so what would it look like for the church to be a space where we could come and say, this is what I really want out of life, and how can we all help each other to do that?
Well, where does desire end and calling begin?
I think that there's part of this, I think, my answer, I think I'm with Kelsey, and I think the answer is yes, that the church should be that place, because at the church's best, it's a communal and networked space that lifts up the wholeness of every member. And so, and again, going back to most people's desires in this show revolve around connection and revolve, like what Lucifer generally does is, and he talks about it, is he introduces someone to someone else. That's generally how these things come about. When people are like, I want to be famous. Okay, you just need to meet that person. Or I want to do, and so I think if church members were truthful and honest about their desires in a way that connected and networked the community as a whole, like, then I think that then yes, we should be. But if, again, it goes back to, if it's a selfish desire that is harmful in any way, then no, then we shouldn't bring that. But if it's just, I want to be a singer, say that out loud in your community, and maybe someone within your community has ears to hear that desire to help you. And so I think it's a yes and for me. Arthur, what do you think? Should the church be that place?
I think it depends. And I like that idea of motive versus means. You know, I don't know, is there, I forgive my struggle on this. I think there's this idea of like, and who am I to judge a person's desire or not? But if the desire is, I want to be the center of attention, we know ministers who are like that. We know ministers and also elders and leaders who've just not been stopped. If the desire is, I want to control everything, we know that those folk are in there. Part of it is that, and ultimately controlling everything or being the center of attention may come from a good place, but it becomes so warped by our humanness. But there has to be desire, because desire is passion, and passion, you know, what if instead of saying, what is your desire, he said, what is your passion? But I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think the church added, I think, well, if we were to ask, let's say, Jesus this question, what does Jesus truly desire? Is the
world peace? I'm sorry,
no, but I think that's a way in which we can engage this conversation from a church lens to say, are we living into how we would assume Jesus would answer that question? If we say, Jesus, what do you truly desire? And Jesus says, for a community of love in my name and in service to one another, right? Like, let's just like, we, you know, kind of blanket statement in that, then that becomes the goal or the vision cast for church communities to say every single day, is that what we are living into? Is our best selves a reflection of the deepest desires of the one we follow? Which is a wild question, considering I have just partnered a conversation between Lucifer and Jesus, but there you go, it's manufactured for the good of the whole. So which I think still aligns with following Christ. So there you go. Yeah, okay, so in that regard, what do we think Lucifer as a show, again, because it's a titular character and title, so I'm going to nuance when I'm talking about the show writ large, but what does that show have to tell us about the innate qualities within us to serve humanity? Because, you know, for Lucifer, episode 1, the pilot episode, you get the devil right on the scene, right? And everyone comes with their preconceived notion of who he is, what he should be doing, things like that. And he's come to LA, the city of angels, to go on vacation, as it says. And in that same space, he finds himself immediately working with the LAPD, and in order to solve a case, to help others. And he also finds himself in therapy, which I think is awesome. And so
literally everyone should be in therapy.
Agreed. This is 2-on-1, sponsored by Jeff Barnwell and therapy.
Like the concept of therapy, yes.
Yeah. But so
we
I'm wondering,
spoil everything and therapy fixes it.
Exactly. But I'm wondering how you all understand the call to serve as a lens cast by the show of Lucifer.
Are you talking about like Lucifer's call to serve that
Well,
he
I
sort
think
of starts to experience?
Yeah, I mean that, and I think that there's something in that for all of us, that like even the worst, the most unredeemable people that we think of have this capacity to do good. And I think we see that in service most kind of plainly in Lucifer.
Yeah. I'm probably not going to actually answer your question, but this has sparked something in me, so I'll say that. So what I was thinking about when we were talking about the last question, I think is kind of heightened by this question, because I'm wondering, at the risk of sounding completely blasphemous and heretical, what if we as clergy or aspiring clergy, I suppose in my case, are called in some way to be like Lucifer is in the show, and how he connects people together and in how he serves his community. And of course, he goes on an arc where he has to figure out what that looks like and why he enjoys it. And at first it's because it brings him closer to Chloe, but then I think Linda is the one who first names it. He starts to really enjoy justice and getting justice, and not just punishment, but justice. And so yeah, that's not a full thought, but
welcome
comments.
Yeah, we don't give you the questions in advance, and sometimes it's like, who's your favorite character, and sometimes it's like, but what is the nature of truth?
Exactly. You know, we're anything's possible here at 211. Arthur, what do you think?
Would you mind repeating the question for me? I got lost in Kelsey's answer and I liked it.
I did too. My question is more, what do we think the innate call to serve is within humanity? Boiled down into a different kind of way of asking what I was convolutedly asking before.
Well, I mean, I think the innate call to serve is that we have to be communal, and it's personal versus communal. And I liked that language earlier of, you know, I love the myth of the self-made man, and it's never going to be the self-made woman, but it's, you know, the self-made man. You know, these people, libertarians annoy the literal hell out of me because they drive on publicly funded roads. Like, they should be forced to drive through the grass. You know, don't go to hospitals, don't use any medical innovation that's been shared. Don't, you know, the whole idea is we're supposed to be a community for one another, and we're losing that emphatically today. Justice can't happen from individuals. Mercy can't happen from individuals. Joy really is a communal thing. So I think that call to serve, and on that call to serve, it's, you know, okay, Lucifer finds a niche and finds a way to help people and everything else. We don't have to fit into a particular mold or way of being, or I don't know. I think about all of my friends who have like their side accounts on social media who do ministry, or like, this is severely filtered so that no one related to my congregation will ever see me say the word shit, you know, that kind of stuff. And I don't know, like whole person serving, all of the sins, all of the foibles, all of the faults serving.
Like, what would it look like if both lay and clergy showed up authentically?
Yeah. What would it mean if what would it mean
or
if,
literally everybody,
if an out clergy person didn't have to be told, oh, so they just accept your sin? I would be like, well, yeah, I mean, I'm covetous, and also like I'm a glutton, but like I don't, oh no, they mean you know, I have a meaningful, committed relationship with somebody of the same gender.
Yeah.
I'm wondering then if it's not a call to service so much as a call to community. So backstory on the Lucifer show, it's a spinoff of a comic book series, which I read in college and like haven't looked at since then. But the Lucifer plot is like a subplot of the comic book series. And the whole thing is that he gets like lonely and tired of being in hell. And so he goes on vacation and he goes to a city, the city of angels, and then does everything that he does in the show, is the spinoff of it. And so if it starts with him being lonely and then he goes to a city where he's surrounded by people and he inserts himself in that community pretty wholeheartedly from the beginning.
I really like that he goes to LA, the city of angels, because rarely do we think of Lucifer as an angel.
Mhm.
And you even see that in that first episode with Linda when he's like, so I came to Los Angeles. She's like, why are you here? And he's like, he assumes that it's just like at the forefront of everyone's mind, like it's the city of angels. Where else would I go? And so I like that there is a unity in that understanding of angels, that even the fallen still have a place in that community. And I like your nuance of maybe it's not service, and I'm totally willing to go there. Absolutely. That it is a call. It's a call to community, because he goes on, quote, vacation, to be with people. And so I think in today's narrative, we often think of vacation as, I'm going away from my traditional spaces, the communities that I serve, the communities that I live in, and all of that. I'm leaving. But what does it mean to have a vacation that actually re-enters those communities in a new form, or in a new understanding?
What are we vacating?
What?
What are we vacating?
Yeah, what are we vacating? And I think that we see that over and over again in Lucifer, in his relationship to the different members and people, because he's in several communities, right? He's in this angel community with Amenadiel, and he's in this therapy community with Linda. He's in the LAPD with Chloe, and then there's Lux, which is like his club that he owns. Like, he goes on vacation and starts a club so that and he lives there so that everyone comes to him, and like he's never alone in his own space. And I think
well, he's never alone in his own space, but he's incredibly alone in
yes
his own space.
Yeah.
And I know you were going there.
No, but I think, and so, like, again, I think a really interesting question to that is, what are we vacating, right? What does Lucifer leaving hell to reinvent himself in the community of angels say to the church, that we need to leave behind and reinvent ourselves in community again? No, does that not make sense? I don't know if that makes sense.
It makes sense. And I think my answer to it actually is going to start not making sense, and then it'll make sense.
We'll reel it back in. Give us an answer, Kels.
I think, I don't actually know if this relates to your question at all, but it's a comment that I'm going to make. Lucifer leaves hell and goes to LA, the city of angels, and he like inserts himself in human community. And I guess I'm really moved by humanity's ability to accept that. And of course it takes them, and Arthur, I don't even know I think Linda's probably the only person you saw have to process that Lucifer is the devil, but
it seems like everybody else just kind of like deals with it.
Yeah, no one really believes him for a while. But as the show goes on, you have to watch them. They like realize it, and they're like, the truth is revealed to them, and then they have to figure out what that means and put it against their stereotypes of him. And like, of course he breaks them down, and that's how Chloe ends up in love with him. But for humanity to be able to take the devil with all of the construction we have around Lucifer and have that be broken down as he enters community, I guess my question coming from that is, what does that say of what the church is capable of if we allow ourselves to step into that space?
Side note, I really like the idea that the devil can't tell a lie either, that he's always truthful, that like it's us that don't believe, it's humanity that doesn't believe him, that he always tells the truth. And
and how many questions do you ask that you don't want the truth about?
Absolutely. I think that's part of like showing up authentically as leadership and lay, as the church. Are you willing to hear the truths that you may or may not, of the questions you are asking that you may or may not actually want to hear? I think that that's part of what it means to live and be and serve community. So, Arthur, you want to ask the next question?
So I do. I really like this show. We got to make sure we have time for eschatology talk too, because I love eschatology. The show's about redemption. I love how obnoxious God's grace is in it, like the cutting off the wings and they regrow. And he's like, this is God screwing with me. And it probably is, because that's what grace does. So something I've been meditating on this year and kind of weighing out is I don't think people can be evil. Or sorry, I don't think people are evil. I think they can do remarkably evil things. We're capable of monstrous evil. But in that, so like my whole situation is this. I believe that God can redeem everyone and God will redeem everyone. What does that mean for the church? What does that mean for us? What does it mean when the next time I ask that question to somebody who's not a guest on my show or suggest this, they're going to go, well, what about Hitler? What do I do about this? This is the what about Hitler question. Please don't talk about Hitler. 3 mentions, that's it. That's all I get.
I love this question, specifically related to Lucifer because of the way that Lucifer does hell, where hell is a place where you're there, the doors are unlocked and you are the person keeping you there. And it's like your own guilt keeping you there. And so I think that says a lot about forgiveness, because, you know, we know God is forgiving, kind of largely undebated. And so what does it say if like the reason that you were trapped in hell is because you can't forgive yourself? And then what does that say about what the church is called to be? If we are like, if we're called to help people sort of make their way to God's kingdom, how do we help people to forgive themselves with the knowledge that God has already done that?
Well, and how do we let people who are irredeemable, so to speak, become redeemed?
Is that, and this is, I don't know that I have an answer other than another question, but is that then kind of pointing to a failing of community, a failing of the church, that we have not journeyed well with these people in earlier, that we've allowed it to get to this point where they become that irredeemable person? Like, what would it look like if, you know, 12-year-old, mention him one more time, 12-year-old Hitler learns truth and love in community and in God's grace? Do we end up with the Voldemort of our time for in that space? Does that make sense? Like, that, does this point back to the innate need for intentional community and relationship with God and God's people? That, I mean, because that, right? Because I think that this is what I like so much about Lucifer, is because, you know, Lucifer as a show and Lucifer as a person, you know, we're not meant to think of Satan in this beautiful, like, we're not like, oh my God, Satan, he's my favorite character in the Bible. Like, that's never the answer, right? And because, so we've been given this person that textually or socially we've understood to be irredeemable. And so therefore, when humanity gets to that place, we're just like, oh, some of us just end up in that space and that's just it. But what the character of Lucifer does in this space is say, that's not the end of this story, that there is more work that gets to be done. And even if you end up in hell, it doesn't have to be your final space if you, again, are willing to be in intentional community with God, and that includes forgiveness and grace and all of the things.
So, I'm sorry, Kelsey, please. Sometimes Spiff and I get on these cycles where we just like love to, and by say we get on these, I love to do that. You're our guest. What do you think?
I spoke right before she did, didn't I?
Yeah.
I know. I thought I was moving and I didn't want to go crazy. So within that, no. So with the communal and with the hell and everything else, Lucifer is vulnerable when he's around Chloe because they love each other. Is that fair? Again, I haven't seen the whole show, but like there's this idea of love causes vulnerability, or is there some sort of like spooky?
Well, that's I think a larger question. Kelsey, I'll let you answer that first because I think that there is, yeah.
Yeah, I think there's debate as to exactly like why that vulnerability happens. I think Lucifer chooses to be vulnerable around Chloe and chooses to let his guard down. There's sort of this theme throughout the show that doesn't show up in any of the episodes that I put in the watch list, of the angels being able to sort of self-actualize, and sometimes doing that accidentally, and it's all in sort of how they see themselves. So as Lucifer sees himself kind of starting to be more like emotionally vulnerable with Chloe, he also becomes more physically vulnerable.
Yeah, because the vulnerability, like when he bleeds for the first time, which is how he recognizes that he's vulnerable around Chloe, the spark of like relationship isn't necessarily there. It's a partner, it's a care, but like not a, oh, like I love this person. It's not romantic in any way when it first starts. And then there is, I will name that. I didn't watch the watch list in that order because I have seen this or the entirety of what is out several times. So I just started watching my favorite episodes. But which are some of those, some of what you listed. But there's a point in which Chloe specifically says, you choose to be vulnerable with me. I choose to be vulnerable with you as well. The vulnerability is a holy choice in that moment. And when they show up for that relationship and for that holiness and that vulnerability together, do they both then understand that the work that they're called to do is much greater than just this police work that they're doing?
So let me tie this together, perhaps.
Please.
The redemption of those who seem irredeemable. It was with the sniper who was killing people's spouses because his spouse died. That was season 2, I think, one of the episodes in there. And at the end, it's you don't want vengeance, you want punishment. You want to be punished in that. Taking punishment is still very much a solitary act, right? It's okay. I'm gonna figure my way out of here. I'm gonna work out all the things. I'm gonna relive the same horrible moment over and over again because surely I have the agency, or I can find the peace, or I can do this thing. That vulnerability is not only the surrender to the fact that it can't be done alone, but it's the acceptance of the fact that it must be done in community. Is that fair?
I think so, yeah.
Does that define love?
Is love defined by
surrender and acceptance of self and relationship, respectively?
Self and relationship. What about loving yourself? How does that fit into that? Is that self-love a relationship to God? Like
perhaps one must let go of oneself enough to love. One must love oneself enough to let go. I mean, hey, here we go. Stamp that bingo card. Kelsey, I'm going through 1 Corinthians this year. I'm in chapter 15 now. By the way, 1 Corinthians, Paul is super positive about the body. Really is. And I didn't really understand that, but like resurrection, yes. Sex, yeah. Anyways, again, Spiff is like, I'm super over Paul, and that's all right.
I'm not. I think about Paul more than I have ever thought about Paul because of 2-in-1 and your commitment to 1 Corinthians. And I don't hate Paul as much as I used to.
Okay. Well, she's super over Paul. I'm super under Paul. It's about, ew.
We balance each other. We're a Paul sandwich.
I don't want to be super under Paul.
You might.
No, I don't like closet cases. No, so I lost my train of thought. Never mind.
We're talking about 1 Corinthians, and Paul is super
so the body, right? So and I want to talk about movement because I want to know more about this because I think it's really brilliant. Your work with it, if you're okay with that, and if it's off limits, that's forgive me for asking. So like, what does it mean to be able to see your body as important and also finite? Like, or so the way, let me just say it in there. The way I've started to love myself is by working out. It's not because I like to stand in the mirror and make my pecs dance. Still can't do that yet. But more it's a matter of I'm like, I have limitations. I'm going to meet those limitations and maybe exceed them a little bit. But I also realize, like, you know, I'm like, yay, my knees work well. And that's not always going to be the case. Or like, you know, it's to love self means to step out of self to see one's own limits. I suppose what I'm arguing on this. So to be redeemed is to see the fact that you cannot be redeemed, but that's what makes you redeemable. I don't know what bodies have to do with it. I think I just went off on a wild tear. So let's go to a different question. I apologize.
No, but I think, well, I do think you touch on something that's interesting in body as kind of surrender and self, that Lucifer, when you first meet Lucifer, he gets shot, all the things, and like, he's fine. Like episode 1, you see him with that movie star woman, and he gets shot, and then he's like, I'm fine, right? And so part of his vulnerability is, again, when he chooses to be vulnerable, he chooses to have a new understanding of his bodily limitations, because he enters into a space in which he can actually die when he is around Chloe, which makes him a better person. Like he acts in his own agency to be better when he is choosing to be vulnerable. And I think that part of, if I'm hearing you right, Arthur, that's kind of what you're saying, is that like you're in that space too, like you're pushing the limits of your vulnerability.
Oh, that's a good one. Okay, pushing the limits of one's vulnerability. So what does movement do, Kelsey?
We do a few different things. Primarily, we provide like movement meditations or different dance pieces for Yale's like daily chapel. And so like tomorrow in our chapel, there's a movement meditation that I provided that's on the phrase, be still and know that I am God. Which is a weird thing to like dance to, because it begins with be still.
That's super weird. I love it.
I like it.
Yeah, it's an interesting process. And so for me, what it boils down to is my like language of prayer is a language of movement. And so when I am like communing with God on my own as an individual, it is very embodied. And so that particular meditation became me like praying on my floor for 2 minutes or so and recording it and then sending it in for other people to watch, which is a very vulnerable thing. And so I arrived at movements with my co-leader's name is Tori, and she has a very similar journey to me. So I'll speak on both of them. We both grew up dancing, and there are these concepts in dance of whether you're performing for the audience or if you're performing more for yourself and the audience is drawn into whatever it is that you're sharing. And so I found that movements is about creating a space where we are embodying those things that we're trying to figure out for ourselves or that we're trying to ask for ourselves, and then opening that up for other people to see, which speaks to the body and to vulnerability as we're talking about it.
So do you look at Lux and see prayer in motion?
I've never thought about it that way. I think in Lux, it's really more dance for performative sake when you see people dancing, because either they're like up on a piano or by a pole, or they're like dancing because you're in a club setting, so you're like trying to attract people, of course. So I think it's different. But I think there's a lot of things that Maze's character does that I see as being really like embodied spirituality.
So can I tell you, when she took the little girl trick-or-treating, my favorite part of anything I watched was when she just stared at this dude, just dead-eyed him, when that guy was giving candy to said little girl. And it was the most beautiful physical work I've seen in a very long time, of just like it's a great scene of just, it's just her presence, and like there's that drawing into it. There's that understanding. The actress who does that is marvelous.
Yeah, she's incredible. I want to ask, I think, because we're talking about prayer and Kelsey's understanding of prayer and how prayer, but how does prayer function in Lucifer? Because I think there's a really intentional thing that it does. And what can we as the church, we as believers, whatever, learn from a devil who prays?
Well, if you have a specific idea of what it's doing, perhaps you should share that. I don't
It's more,
necessarily have one.
I know it's a communal question. You know, those watching at home, feel free to chime in as well.
Okay, so what does prayer do?
Yeah, what is, I guess that's a better way of asking, is like, what does prayer do? Because I think I was really moved, like legitimately, like spiritually moved when Lucifer gets shot because Chloe is dying, and then prays to God, whom he has this really tumultuous relationship with. But that there is that faith? Is that, I don't know. And so I guess my question is, you know, I don't know what my question is other than what does prayer do and how do we think it functions?
So prayer has to be from a place of vulnerability. I was going to phrase that as a question previously, but it must be. We've, you know, Sermon on the Mount, chapter 6. Don't be like the hypocrites using every fancy word. Again, it's not drawing people in, it's performative. Don't do that, Jesus says. Instead, go in secret and, you know, understand your limitations and understand your finitude. And not finitude as in, you know, you're going to die, but finitude is in you're not going to be able to bridge whatever gap there is. I think that trust has to come from powerlessness, right? Lucifer literally cannot do anything else except pray. I think we can encounter powerlessness in that, but I think that powerlessness is really where grace moves. And it's not as if we must be divested from it. I think grace is best experienced when we literally stop thinking we have any control over it. It's the joke about the person looking for parking in the rain at Target. You know this joke? Mm-hmm. And he drives around and it's just pouring rain and he's like, okay, God, help me find a parking space. If you do it, I'll start tithing again. Fine, I'll be a youth sponsor. I'll go to Sunday school every week with my kids. We'll get up earlier and make sure we're there on time every single Sunday. And right as he comes down right by the door, somebody pulls out of a parking spot and drives off. And he goes, never mind, I took care of it. It's that, and I think, of course, the devil prays. You know, it's not atheists in foxholes, but perhaps it is. I don't know.
I know. Kels, what do you think?
I think I'm struck by different things that each of you have said, and I can't remember who said what, but I think prayer specifically involves humility. Mm-hmm. And I think when Lucifer is like bleeding out on the floor and prays is one of the first places we see him be humble. Mm-hmm. And I think it involves recognizing our limitations, like we've talked about, but I think it also it comes from a place where one of those things that you really desire is not going to happen. And so you're in this like humble space where you realize that, really specifically Lucifer's prayer, I think, is this way. There's obviously like a million different ways of praying, but it's this space of where you really desire something and you know that like there's nothing that you can do in your limitations. And so you pray.
Well, and Arthur named trust as a kind of part of prayer, and I think that's interesting in this context. I think the relationship between trust and prayer, I think, is important. But I think that there is, you know, for all the bemoaning that Lucifer does about how dad does this to me and dad does that to me, that we see in that moment the humility that there is still trust in relationship. and that is found when we are, or that is experienced best when we are most vulnerable and open and willing to get out of our own ways to trust that someone else will show up for us in those moments, and whether that other person is God or whether that other person is community. And I think that that's why we're going back a little bit to, I think, our very first question, which is like, the innate need for community within each of us, is because we trust that in those dark moments of our solitude and self, that we will be met with someone or something that cares so deeply for us to move forward, that we pray for that momentum through that experience.
So I do want to get to one thing before we go to our final question, if that's all right. Because Kelsey, you brought up fan fiction versus canon. One of the things I love about shows like Lucifer, Supernatural falls into this. There's shows that really engage their communities, and sometimes canon gets shifted, but it's in conversation with the fans, right? And fan fiction is collaborative and it's imaginative, and forgive me because I'm really not even applying this to Lucifer, but I guess I am. But because Lucifer is a retelling and it's a reimagining and everything else, should the canon be closed in Christianity? Is it possible to close the canon?
My answer to that is like a firm no. Just because there's so many non-biblical sources that have been so important to my own spirituality and my own understanding of my relationship with God. But I also don't think that we need to have a uniform canon. I think there are things that are important for me that are probably not as important for you, and like vice versa. And so,
amen. I felt firmly in that camp as well. I believe that we humanly have closed a canon for kind of publication's sake, I guess, but I don't think that like God has ever closed the canon of our lives in the way in which we are called to engage scripture in midrash and anything else that comes our way. So.
And you've read some of the Sid Epigraphia, like not just Thecla, your lady, but like the wacky shit, like the Apocalypse of Peter and the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, like that. I love it, but I'm super glad I don't have to like preach on it once every 3 years in the lectionary.
Yeah, I mean, if we expand the canon to everything that God has ever used to move our spirit, like you don't have a focal point for it's exactly why we put out a list of here are 6 Lucifer episodes to watch. And there are 5+ seasons for you to engage if this piques your interest in this way, right?
This is the perspective from which we are looking at the mountains.
Exactly. And I think I think when we are open to the movement of the Spirit, we do that best by saying, here's our, here we go. Look at like a good pastor. I've got a Bible right here. Like here is the Hebrew Bible, and I'm not going to show you which Bible it is because it's a well, are you ready for this? This is a Precious Moments King James Version Bible.
I got a KJV right here too. If it was good enough.
Bananas for both of us to both have this at our fingertips.
Stephanie, if it's good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for us.
Stop it. But what, like we have that as the lens from which we preach and teach and kind of focus, but when we do it well, it gives those with ears to hear and those, to see and experience God's language of grace and love in things beyond it. That in its best form, the canon itself says, I am not closed. But when we limit it is when we say, okay, here's the only thing that we're viewing this through. And I think that is not what Jesus desires.
Sorry, I don't know whose this is. And there's like this weird little note about teaching from it in it. It's not my handwriting. I'm sorry. I was listening to what you said. Okay, can we go to our last and final thing?
We are. I can't believe we're already there. There is so much rich and deep theological reflection that happens in Lucifer. It's one of the things that I very much love about it. And I'm so grateful for you, Kelsey, for coming on and having this conversation with us, because I love Lucifer. I love this show. I cannot wait for the new season. But as is tradition, you will get to answer our final answer, or our final question first. And our final question is, what biblical story, person, book, theme are you most reminded of in Lucifer?
I could not have asked for a better introduction to my answer to that question.
Hooray!
In what you said about how there are so many sort of theological themes touched on, I really see the book of Psalms appearing in Lucifer, because there's all of, thank you. There's all of these moments of lament and of repentance and of hope and of prayer, and they're done by so many different characters. And I think rewatching the show in preparation to come talk about it, I found myself really moved by the way that you can watch the spiritual journey of each character throughout the arc of the show. And so I think my answer is the book of Psalms.
It's the first time we've had somebody pull out a book, and it's the first time I think somebody's dropped the Psalms on us. That's really good.
Yeah. Arthur, want to go?
I'm going for the rich young man with an asterisk to indicate Midrash, because the rich young man is the character that we're always like, this guy's a jerk. Let him go off. Ha ha ha, screw him. And like, again, it's that redemption thing. If God is redeeming everyone, I always like to imagine the rich young man like goes home and he pours a glass of wine that's from when they invented wine or whatever, like sitting there in the midst all the opulence and says, well, okay, maybe. And he never gives away everything. And he never quite gets it, but he starts on a path that he's being redeemed on. Because I don't think, I think the whole thing with and I'm going to particularly name it as Jesus in there, because why not, I think you don't get to stay the same when you encounter the divine. And if it's engaged authentically. And every time God messes up Lucifer's life with grace, he there's a turn. So
that's good. So I went with a weird one, and I'll shout out to Stephanie Wilson for helping me think through this. I'm going to name Lucifer as Job. And I like the idea that the beginning of Job starts with God and Satan having this like conversation about Job and Job's life. But I'm using Satan in that regard as the sins of the people. I think it's a relationship with God and the sins of the people to enact the understanding of Job at work in the world, Job being Lucifer in this situation, that what happens to Lucifer is this kind of emotional turmoil that keeps pushing and casting him aside and moving him forward, more emotionally, some physically, but that there is this growth journey, this intentional growth journey that Lucifer and Job are on at the hands of humanity and God. And so I'm seeing that there, and that the sins of humanity, the actual Satan at work in the beginning of Job, that conversation is the collective sins of humanity that show up, because that's I also have I think Ella's the resurrected Jesus, and I have said this before. I think that her embodiment of she is everything that I would hope when Jesus comes back, that there is grace and expansiveness to that person that we get to experience. She is someone that uses her body, uses her sexuality, uses her smarts, is a team player, gives hugs to everybody, is about that love of community.
Bodily participation in the world.
Yeah, and I have a fan theory that we're going to experience that possibly later, but so I have that as well.
May your fan theory become canonical.
Oh.
All right. Well, Kelsey, thank you 1,000 times for being on 2-on-1 with us today. I'm going to pop up this screen. It shrunk down.
Weird.
Oh no, what is happening right now? Of course, 2-on-1 is sponsored by Jeff Wonroe Design, celebrating 15 years of making ordinary time extraordinary. We want to make sure that that image is there for jeffwonroe.com. Kelsey, thank you again and again and again. The nice thing is you only gave us recommended episodes for seasons 1 through 3, and I bet season 6 is going to drop on Netflix eventually.
It's 5B. If we're going to be very particular about it, and it's 5B, and then there's debate on whether we're getting 6. So stay tuned.
Okay, but you know, our door is always open. You get to walk out of it yourself. It's like hell. Spiff, what's coming down the pike for our next few episodes here?
Next week, we're going to have Reverend Dr. Alan Turlip, and we're going to talk Weird Al right before Thanksgiving, which I think is going to be very fun. Then we have Reverend David Wheeler, and we're going to talk about meme culture in community. And then we are going to talk The Good Place for week 2 of Advent. So, so many things to come up. If you'd like to be a guest on 2-on-1, give us a shout, 2on1project@gmail.com. Like, subscribe, and do all the things that you have to do to really see like the great amount of work that Spiff does on our social media. I, on the other hand, go, how does she do that? It's great. It's good to be in conversation and community with you all. Kelsey, thank you again so much, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Thank you.
Goodbye.